Excellent. How are you? You ready to turn this into a party? Yeah? Come on. It was last year. We need to make it so again. This is really great. I'm honored to actually lead this. This is not the John Tolva panel. This is the data-driven decision-making panel, and we've got some great panelists coming up, but I've been sort of given the honor of kicking it off. One of the terrifying things about following Anthony Townsend is how clearly, and in some ways singularly, he articulates the fault lines between the sort of big industry, top-down vision of smarter cities and the sort of bottom-up civic innovation that we partake in. I'm especially sensitive to that, having spent a good chunk of my career at IBM and ending it there in the Smarter Cities group, and am able to sort of compare and contrast what is going on in the industry at large with what is happening in cities. So let's see if I can get this to work. I want to talk about, well, I'm not the first, and I probably won't be the last to appropriate a Tim O'Reilly quote up here on the stage. But the government as platform is the city as platform. And I mean that perhaps in a more literal way than even Tim does, in the sense that the city has always been a platform. It's been a platform for expression. There are literal platforms in it. For instance, this is a protest sign from the teacher strike a few weeks ago. This has been fact-checked. Mayor Emanuel is not, and never has been, on MySpace. But the idea, as serious as that strike was, the idea that the streets themselves became, for a little over a week, the platform for voicing the concerns of the teachers union, is something that we keep in mind as we build our technologies. And what I want to talk about is the various ways that we've endeavored to make the city a platform for internal innovation and efficiency, and more importantly, for external. So what do I mean by this? In the most specific use of the word platform, it's taking an idea or an invention and using it as a seed for an ecosystem of innovation. And I look to the history of Chicago very often, actually, to see what we're good at, what we've been good at. And what you see in the upper left there is the Union Stockyards. It was the largest livestock butchery in the world up until the middle of the 20th century. And why did that happen in Chicago? Really, it was because of the sort of bounty of prairie agriculture that led to a higher value form of commerce, in this case, pigs and cattle. Well, that stuff needed to be moved around the country, which is why Chicago became the national rail nexus. And you know, one of Anthony's slides about why every city in America shouldn't be pursuing fiber is very interesting in this context, because the city of Chicago actually has the most internet traffic by volume passing through it, precisely because of that rail network and the fiber right-of-way that flows over it. But back to the 19th century, pigs and cattle, it turns out, rot. And so the refrigerated train car had to be invented, right? This is a absolutely secondary, probably tertiary invention that came from the bounty of prairie agriculture. And the sort of final innovation, if you want to extend this as far as it'll go, is the invention of mechanisms for trading on what that good might be worth, the options exchange, the futures exchange. So I'm not dealing with meat, I'm not dealing with railroads or exotic financial instruments, but I do think there's some guidance to be had here in how you take an idea and build an ecosystem of other things around it. Now, our raw material, our pork, if you want to call it that, our meat, is data. And there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it. I mean, the really high-value stuff is real-time data, future aspirational data, or intentional data, I should say, scheduled interactions. And then, you know, where the big in big data comes from is the historical data. And the interesting thing about this is that it all shares place. It all shares an X and a Y, a lat and a long, a coordinate. And that allows us to do some pretty interesting things. So this is WindyGrid. This is a system that we use internally. We stood it up. We hosted the NATO summit that allows us to, at a click, look at any of that data inside the city. So for instance, you could click on a parcel and get every history of interaction that the city has had with that, building violations, permits, those sorts of things. But where it becomes interesting is when you start to layer in data that is not ours. So what you're looking at here is 311 open requests layered with tweets. And why is this interesting? I mean, this is actually just a nice visual, but when it becomes interesting is when you're using one to reinforce the other, or using one as a proxy for the other. So a system that we're building off of this, actually, is to use the incidence of tweets. People, it turns out, like to tweet when they're unhappy about food poisoning or about a tree being down, so those sorts of things, as passive service requests that go right in through the Code for America built Open 311 API to the system, right? So this is a way of using, not unlike what Nigel and Chris have done in Boston with Street Bump, which is basically using sort of passive sensing, listening to what the city is saying and being proactive about deploying services. In this case, tweets. We're also doing this around food inspections because it turns out people like to tweet about barfing when they get ill. They just often don't say where they were. But we're sensitive to those sorts of things. This is a map that shows divergences from normal. Which isn't to say that it's desirable, but those blocks in this, it's called a chloroplast map, are showing us where something's not what it used to be. And does that tell you much? Well, it does when you start to layer in other data. So what you're looking at here is street lights out. And why that's interesting is because in mining the data, we see that there are correlations. On some blocks, in some neighborhoods, when alley street lights go out, the garbage cans go missing. Not every block, not every neighborhood, and not necessarily the ones you'd expect. But what that tells us then is that when a abnormality occurs, we're going to bump that alley light out request up to the top of the queue because we know there are follow-on consequences to it. And it's those little sort of unintended consequences, unforeseen effects of a system of systems that we're trying to get at with this. Now, by far the most personally satisfying, but also the most important project that I've had in the year and a half I've been with the mayor has been the Code for America project. It's all been around 311. Jesse Bounds is going to come out here in a little while and tell you about it. But we implemented the Open 311 API. We're not the first city to do that, but we've done it with a couple of changes to it that specifically highlight transparency. That is, and this is actually the mayor's idea. He wanted a FedEx view, that was his word, of what's going on inside the city with a 311 request. So not just an app that snaps a pothole, but he wanted citizens to see when that pothole request gets handed off from transportation to the water department because it's actually not a pothole, it's a sinkhole, right? Because those are the kinds of things, I mean, previous to this, it was a completely opaque process. Now, this is how the city works, in addition to you learning about when it's going to get fixed. So that's Service Tracker. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Here you can see going sort of vertically down, you've got the photo, you see that it's been assigned to CDOT, you see that an inspection has taken place all along the way. So the secondary effect of this is actually using transparency to educate people about what the city does. That's a consequence of being a black box, is that people just dream up all kinds of things about what the city's doing when they're not telling me what they're doing. The most successful transparency project we've had was last winter called Chicago Shovels. And this is Plow Tracker, which we have Train Tracker and Bus Tracker. We were one of the first cities. We've been managing our fleet for years, our plow fleet, by GPS. So we thought, a lot of people think that there's some sort of logic or political logic to where the plows go. It's not true. They actually go to certain areas of the city first because they need it, like arterials and bridge decks. So we put this out there, and we blew away every website record we had ever set, but by fourfold, which is somewhat confounding to me. I had sort of moved up the value stack of transparency from just showing what a city does to being useful. I mean, it's not like you can flag a plow down to give you a ride or something like that. But what this proved to me is that the desire to simply see how a city works is still an unslaked thirst. And we shouldn't lose touch with that as we're doing all this sort of very advanced analytics and things like that. Sometimes just transparency is enough. Now, earlier, it was mentioned, the Adopt a Siren project was mentioned. This is Adopt a Sidewalk. And this is getting to what I was talking about in my 3 words, the digital public way, is we're trying to think of ways to bring technology closer to the built environment, away from computers. I mean, I happen to think that it's going to become, or going to seem quaint in not too many years, that we thought of e-government as sitting in front of a computer and interacting with government. When you experience your city, you experience the services your government provides for you in that city in the city, not sitting at your desk, not even on your mobile phone. So this was one way of taking the original social network, which is the sidewalk, right? Just the built environment, and layering some game mechanics into allowing you to claim your sidewalk, claim others, shovel out, and compete. Why did we do this from an efficiency standpoint? Well, our 311 gets clogged with calls during a snow event saying, when are you going to come shovel my sidewalk? Well, the city doesn't do that. We never have. And this is, so it's a couple things. It's about an incentive to neighborliness. It's about reducing call volumes at 311. Now, as it happens, it barely snowed last year in Chicago, so this didn't get a heavy workout, but I'm hoping for blizzards this year. So this is where it gets really interesting. This is the civic innovation part of it. Not internal systems and not even external websites that the city hosts for our residents, but what are the residents and businesses doing with the data that we publish? We had an app competition last year, Apps for Metro Chicago. It was across jurisdictions, county and state. Lots of cool stuff came out of it. But the best part of this, which doesn't get talked about in too many places other than Code for America, is the social infrastructure, the social, the work you have to do to create a cohesive community. These app competitions, when done right, the greatest deliverable of them is a designer meeting an urbanist or a community leader getting to know an engineer. That's what matters and lays a foundation for us to go back to them, to validate ideas, to enlist them. It's why the timeliness of the brigade was so great, some of whom are here. So you get apps like this that are kind of head-scratchingly simple, but really are all these are taking data that was already out there and making it actionable. So in Chicago, we sweep streets, and you get a ticket if you don't move your car. This allows you to put your address in, put your email address in, and you'll get an email the night before to allow you to move it. You might say, well, the city's going to lose revenue on that. I don't really think that's the concern here. Happier citizens are better citizens, and this has been wildly popular. So is this. This is called miparque. This is a 24-hour town hall for a underserved, mostly Hispanic area called Little Village that has very little green space, as you can see on that map, but they're getting a new park built atop a Superfund site, and they expressed interest in having more of connection with the park district and the urban planner than just the sort of perfunctory town hall that explains what's going on. So this app was built, 5 female developers, I should heartily add, and it's ongoing, voting, sending in ideas. What should this public space be like? And I really think that this and future versions of this is the future of digital placemaking and urban planning. Within moments of the Chicago Teachers Union strike happening, this map was cobbled together online. Fairly simple, except that this is lots of different data sources, and this isn't the city doing it. It's our community of civic developers. Now, obviously, they knew that the strike was looming and had this waiting in the wings, but the nimbleness that was exhibited here and constantly updating it during the strike was very great to see. Chicago lobbyists. This is when it gets serious, folks. This is a social network of influence based upon the data that had been in the portal forever, but it wasn't made actionable through an interface like this. This is who lobbies whom for what. How does the money flow? And you can imagine a version of this that actually leads all the way to the legislation, where you can map exactly the sort of tendrils of power and influence. I think this is fertile ground for further development. One of the newest projects to come out of a weekly OpenGov hack night that we have at one of our incubators is called How's Business. It's basically those labels, been better, turning around, not looking good. Those are sort of the layman's interpretations of the way that the indicators, economic indicators, are going in Chicago. Again, built upon disparate data sources by our community. Now, what we have, I don't know this to be true, but I'm going to say it as though it is, that we're one of the first cities to have businesses actually built on top of open data, that their value proposition, this is a nonprofit, but there's a for-profit adjunct to this, their value proposition is we're going to build our business on top of the city's data. That's pretty risky, actually, right? That would give a VC tremors, right? You've got a single point of failure from a government of all places. But there's such an unquenched thirst for things like, is my street clear? How did that bill come to pass? What's the metro schedule? That I think that there's room for innovation, for-profit innovation, I might add, on top of cities' data. So let me just end by noting, again, the digital public way. Where we want to take this forward is we have data.cityofchicago.org. It's absolutely a platform. Things are being built upon it. But we believe that the technology in the public way, if you just walk down the street, especially in San Francisco with SF Park and things like that, there's a ton of network endpoints. We've got trash cans that are online. We've got our parking meters are online. Public bike shares coming in the spring. But none of these things are talking to one another. It is not a platform. I mean, if you visualized it, whoops, go back. I don't have that slide in there. It looks like chaos, right? The public bike share has no idea, what the transit is going on. We are working to build an operating system that can be built upon, interacted with a network of public objects in the exact way that city.dataofchicago.org is. I believe that this sort of profusion of technology in the public space is the next frontier. And I'd love to see Code for America projects in the future sort of tackle that as a problem. So before I bring the panelists out, I will just remind you that this was the face of big data once in government. Sort of like the last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. We've come a long way, but in some cases, though not as physicalized as this, our massive data stores do resemble this and share the lack of efficiencies. So what I'd like to do is invite my panelists to come out. I'll introduce them one by one if you guys could all come out. Mike Flowers is the analytics director for New York City. Come on, guys. Ann Milgram, former Attorney General of the state of New Jersey. She's with the Arnold Foundation now. Steve Spiker is Research Director at Urban Strategies Council. And then Jesse Bounds, Code for America 2012 Fellow. All right, so they're going to do some quick presentations, each down the line, and then we're going to sit down and have a short panel conversation.